All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us today. What we're going to do is we're going to go over the Illinois NRCS Native Seed Calculator with job sheet. The calculator is an Excel workbook with several spreadsheets that are on tabs that help develop mixes and can develop some pretty robust mixes for those who are eager to do so. But so it's kind of one of those deals you can make it as simple or as fine-tuned as you like. What I'm going to do is just show you kind of a broad makeup or how it's constructed, and then we'll start getting into the functionality. And so for folks using the seeding calculator, the first tab, that is where we've got the instructions on how to use the calculator and the filtering tools. The second tab is the calculator itself, where they would be inputting the information about the species for the mix. After that, we've got tabs for each of the different types of mixes. What are the criteria? The 327 mix criteria. This particular one is the 327 pollinator and monarch check sheet. So it'll go through and let you know whether or not you're meeting the criteria of the standard. Same thing, just looking at conservation cover. This is a 327 that's not a pollinator planting. And what you're going to see on all these check sheets, we've got the full seeding rate. Then we also have a check sheet for the interseeding rate, which is the half of the full seeding rate based on the interseeding job sheet. So they're both in there. We also have the 643, restoration of rare and declining habitats or communities check sheet. And there's a 512, forage and biomass check sheet. After those tabs, this is where we start getting into kind of the meat and potatoes, the data in the background. When the users start on the calculator, start selecting criteria, et cetera, there are filters going on these tables. There's the Forbes table, this grass table. This woody is subshrub and vine species. But as you can see, there's all sorts of species information, the moisture regime, the types of habitat where that particular species is found. These acronyms are for the different regions of the state. So this is the Central Corn Belt, driftless area, et cetera. Whether or not it's a preferred monarch plant, according to the Working Lands for Wildlife Initiative criteria. You can get in here the estimated cost per ounce, pound, how many seeds are in an ounce, the flowering period, the functional group as a plant. This stuff's getting kind of down in the weeds. And then germination types. Some of these plants require cold moist stratification, which means if they're seeded in the spring, they're probably not going to germinate and they're going to lose viability over the year. At some point in time, I'm going to add some sort of spreadsheet in here that will let you know which species in the mix need to be cold moist stratified and kind of the percentage. And so the user can get in there and say, hey, you know what, a significant proportion of my mix needs cold moist stratification. I should probably be seeding this in the fall so that it will naturally stratify. And there are some links here to BONAP where there are maps, and then we're also starting to put in here links to insect and pollinator information for each of these species. So if people really want to get in and start exploring, there is a lot of data in these tables. And as Ellen mentioned, we are required by policy to use the names in the plants database, and that's what I think is throwing a lot of people off when they're trying to use the calculator, because the common name that they're used to is no longer the common name, or never was the common name in the plants database. And so then what we have after these tables for the forbs, grasses, and woody plants, there's a name lookup. And so they can come in here if they do, I've got the instructions up here, if they do a Control-F, it'll pop up a find box. and we can put in, you know, I'm just going to, so I said Calamagrostis, find next, it came down here, found it, and it's blue joint. So maybe in the past it was Canada blue joint, and they're not finding it. They can come in here and do this find and look up names. Sometimes what's difficult is that the name has significantly changed. Joe Pyeweed is a good one as an example. So the next tab here, we've got plant name synonyms. Again, they can do a Control F, and we're going to do, let me pull it over again. Oh, the species name for spotted Joe Pye, Eupatorium maculatum. So I'm just going to, I'm not even going to finish the whole word, but I hit Eup Mac, and what it will do is it jumps us down to the Eupatorium maculatum, and what you can see here, these are the synonyms. So this is the new name. What's in blue is the new official name in the plant's database, and then you can see down here the different the synonyms for that particular species. So this is another way that they can try to find species where, like I said, the name in the calculator is not familiar to them. So most of the species they're looking for are in this calculator. But there are some species we took out of the calculator, such as the evening primrose, Canada goldenrod, I think frost aster, species that are going to colonize the site anyway. We probably shouldn't be spending seed on those species because if we pick a different species, we are, you know, species in the calculator, we're going to increase the species richness, the number of species out there. We want to make sure we're planting species that aren't going to colonize on their own, or that we at least wouldn't expect them to. So that may be part of the reason why they may not be finding certain species in the calculator. And then the last tab here are the revisions. So every time we've gone in and conducted a revision, you're going to see the date that it was done and released, whether or not we revised criteria. If we revised criteria, that means that it's going to affect information in the calculator as to whether or not you're meeting the standard. If it's just species information, that just means we updated some information about a species. It's not going to change any sort of criteria. You know, maybe we decided we are going to add a new bloom period. Maybe there's a species that was only mid, and we said, we think we should probably be counting that as early as well, so we'll go in and add early. So like I said, it's something that's not going to require anybody to change a mix. It's just providing greater options. Or if we add species, things of that sort. In this particular case here, September 5th, we expanded ecoregion options for many of the species because we found a new resource that provided locality information in Illinois that was very helpful. So you know, every time we release a calculator, you can zip over here and you can see what was changed in this new version. Do we have any questions about that broad overview before I continue?
Hey, Jennifer, this is Roger.
Yes, Roger.
You had Control S for the synonym names. What was the other link you hit right ahead of that? I didn't catch all that.
Oh, okay. Let me go back. It was Control S, like S like Sam.
Yeah.
Or sorry, no, F like Frank. Sorry.
Okay.
So it's up here. To search for a species on this page, you press the Control and F keys at the same time, and it's going to open a find box. So I'm going to do that right now again.
Oh, there it is. Okay, I see it now.
You got it? Excellent. And this is where you can start typing in a name, and you could find the let me think of another example. We'll just do, if I put in panicum, it sits you down and you can go to all the different panicums and try to find the name. It's just a way to jump around. So a lot of times the scientific name hasn't changed, but the common name has. And so that's where this would be very helpful, because they could get in here, put in that scientific name, and then figure out what that common name is that you actually have to use in the calculator to develop the mix. Someday I want to set it up where you can use the scientific name or the common name, have an option. But right now you have to use the scientific name? No, right now you have to use the common name, because most people are more comfortable with the common names.
It has to be the right common name.
Yeah, but and that's the thing. It's got to be exactly how it is in the calculator. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. But both on this page, which is the name lookup page, and on the plant synonym page, you can use that Control F, type in what you're looking for, and it'll jump you down and try to figure it out.
Yeah, I see. That's fine. Yeah, I understand fully, because we struggle with the same thing part of the time with the NRI stuff we have to do on plants. So.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
May I just interject something another way instead of the Control F? If you can't remember that like me, you just go up to the top upper right, use the Find and Select. Little magnifying glass on the upper right in the toolbar. Yeah.
So you can just go to Find.
Yeah, and that tells you the same thing, Control F, but
yeah, let's go. We'll go over and do it again.
It's just the same place.
There it is again.
Yep.
All right, so there's a couple of ways to get at it. All right, so in the beginning here, what we've got the instruction page, and it goes through all the different, the instructions, the filtering criteria, what they mean, what they are, why are they important, and then we do have references that we used to inform the filtering criteria for each of the species in the calculator. We've got in this calculator 301 forbs. We've got 135 graminoids, which are the grasses, sedges, rushes, those types of species, and then 20 subshrubs and or vines. So significant number of species in here. So like I said, people then start developing some pretty diverse mixes. And when you've got that number of, all of these species, they don't grow well just anywhere. Each of them have an ecoregion that they're typically limited to. They've got site conditions, and so that's where the filtering criteria comes in. It takes those long species lists and starts whittling them down to species that are best suited for the site where the planting is going to occur. As you can see up at the top here, I've got, again, the criteria revision update is 11/26. And then the latest species information update is going to be the same date, because I also updated some species information in this version that'll be going out probably, I don't know when Gene wants to get it out.
We'll post it right away. We'll post it today or whenever it's ready, and then mention that it was changed in the next tech guide notice.
So the first deal here is we're looking at select site conditions appropriate for the seed mix being developed. So what they're going to be able to do is they can select an ecoregion, and what it's going to do is all the pick lists in the calculator are going to be filtered out, and only species that are native to that region of the state are going to be available in their pick list. For NRCS and partner employees who have access to our Geodata Server, they can zip in and get the ecoregion shapefile that they can use in ArcMap or Toolkit. They can bring it in. It should be in the county subfolder of the ecological folder in your Geodata server. If you're developing a mix for a statewide application, then there is a statewide option. Excuse me. That statewide option will be very helpful, especially for the seed companies who are trying to develop mixes. They can put together kind of a mix based on species that could be seeded anywhere in the state. And then for 512, for the forage and biomass seedings, the ecoregion pick list can be left empty at this point. There are no requirements for them to pick an ecoregion. And what we've got to the right here is actually the map of those ecoregions. Like I said, they can pull this off their Geodata server, but it shows you, the yellow here is the central corn belt, the green is this driftless area, etc. The next option, they can go in and they can select a soil moisture category for the area to be seeded. The choices are xeric, mesic, or hydric. Doing this is going to filter the pick list to the species that are adapted to those types of soil moisture regimes. If they are preparing a mix for a dry mesic location, what they can do is they can go into the calculator, they can pick xeric for the dry, select the species that they want from that list, and then they can go in and change the filter to mesic, which is going to automatically, on the fly, change the filtering of the species list, the pick list, and they can choose mesic and then pick the mesic species they want to include in the mix. The other option on the filtering criteria is they can select by habitat type being restored, the prairie, savanna, woodland, wetland, etc. And then they can also choose whether a mix is being developed for a short or long-term restoration. Basically what this is, say they're working with CRP, or it's a mix, they want it to be a very inexpensive mix. They can pick this option. If they pick short-term, what it's going to do is the calculator looks at the average cost per seed for each species, like say in the forb table. What's the average cost of a seed for per seed for forbs? And then it's only going to allow those that are at that average or below in the pick list. So average or below cost. And then I've had some people say, hey, I picked that short-term option because I need an inexpensive list, but I can't find butterfly weed, and I really want butterfly weed in the mix. And that's where I told them we'll go in, check onto the long-term option, and then what it does, again, on the fly, it allows all the species to be shown in the pick list, and then they can go in and pick butterfly weed, which is a more expensive species on a seed basis, and so that's why it wasn't showing up in their list. So there are ways to work with the calculator. Kind of like Sharon was saying, there are ways you can get in there to kind of get what you're trying to find, and it's going to be a fine balance. There's a difference between going in, developing a site-suited mix, and having flexibility. That makes total sense. Versus somebody who's just going in and trying to create a mix and just wanting to throw everything in it without really making sure it's site-suited. And so that's where we just got to be real careful, how they're picking criteria and making sure we're developing a mix that's going to be successful. It's going to make the customer happy with the planting. The other thing to keep in mind in here is the cost. And I'm probably going to say this several times. We're always hesitant to put in cost, average cost, and the estimated cost, because costs vary so much. They can vary among years and even within a year. I know one year, we had Big Blue Stem. It was selling for $6 a pound. the following year, because of a poor harvest and conditions, it jumped to $12 a pound. We're not going to be able to, on the fly, keep going in and updating these costs. And so the calculator does give you estimated costs, but which are helpful when you're developing the mix, but just know that those aren't guaranteed and that those costs can only be verified by a quote from a vendor. The other option, the filtering option we've got on the calendar would be they could select for a Monarch mix or a forage and biomass mix. And so again, those pick lists are going to be filtered to species that meet those criteria. Sometime in the future, again, here I've gotten a request that somebody would like also a box where you can select for the 3 different bloom periods, the spring, summer, or fall. That would be helpful as well. So that's on my list of things to look for to put into this in the future. So if anyone's got something like that, hey, this would be very helpful to us, pass those along, those suggestions along to me. I'll make note of them and see if there's a way to incorporate those suggestions. They're going to choose a seeding rate option. They've got 2 options. They can put it in as pounds per acre, or they can put it, develop the mix on seeds per square foot. Whichever way they decide to do it, the calculator, if they put in pounds per acre, the calculator is automatically going to calculate what that is in a seeds per square foot basis. The species can be selected by clicking on the drop-down menu under the common name header. I'm going to show you guys that. All the species in the calculator have been reported as being commercially available in Illinois or adjacent states at some point in time. Again, that varies. Sometimes species disappear for a year or 2 and then they pop up. And so just keep that in mind. But we don't have a lot of that going on. Usually we're in pretty good shape. Seeding calculators, like I said, it's going to provide that estimated cost for the mix. I gave you guys a caveat on those, and just always keep that in mind. It's those estimated costs are estimates. As the seed mix is developed, the species data is automatically transferred to a seeding plan, which I'm going to show you in a bit. In the seeding plan, there's a header where they could put in all the information. They can put in information about acres need to be seeded, any fertilizer requirements, which they probably shouldn't for a native mix, seeding dates, and additional seeding information. There's some buttons to hide rows and things of that sort that I'll show you guys when we're in that check sheet. And then lastly, the check sheets that are back there just explains what those are. And how the user can go take a look at these check sheets to make sure that they're meeting the requirements of the standard. And then we just have the references here. We've got like a bit here at the end. Reference is up here, and superscript 10 is the USDA plants database. Is where we pulled information to populate the calculator. So we're going to dive into it then. So this is the actual calculator page. This is where you are developing the mix. This is the filtering criteria, everything up here that I was just talking about, where they can start whittling down their pick list. They can pick an ecoregion. I'm just going to say Central Corn Belt Plains. And then I'm going to pick mesic species. Let's say we have a mesic site. We're going to say we're dealing with prairie. And right now we're just going to leave long-term, short-term options. We'll just leave those blank. So what that means is we are allowing all the species, the species to stay in the list regardless of whether, of their cost, basically. Over here are the checklists for Monarch preferred or forage and biomass plantings. Here is where they can choose how to develop a seed mix, whether it's seeds per square foot or they want to do so by pounds per acre. So right now we've got seeds per square foot. We can go in, and so here when I said there's this pick list under the common name header, this is where they go. They click on the white cell here, pick down, and so we've got a species list here that's been filtered based on the criteria we listed up above. So I'm just going to pull in big blue stem, and you see its column started to populate. So we picked big blue stem. It brought over the scientific name. It indicates that this is a bunch grass. And so over here then, this is where, again, in the white cells, we're going to be putting in seeds per square foot. I'm just going to say 5. Again, things are calculating. So it's 5 seeds per square foot. The equivalent is 1.68 pounds per acre for the big blue stem. Here you're getting kind of the estimated cost per pound. Right now it's 100% of the mix because it's the only thing that we put in the calculated. And right now we're looking at an estimated cost per acre of $12. And then it is a perennial warm season grass. So you're looking at these functional types for these species. I'm going to go in and I am going to add a cool season. So we've got Canada Wild Rye. Again, it's a bunch grass. We're going to say 5 seeds per square foot. Again, the calculator, so it's running all these calculations. We've got an estimated cost of $4 an acre. You can see it's a perennial cool season grass. Any questions on this so far? Yes.
Go back and hit your seed list. Just click on there you go. You've got like big blue stem and then big blue stem 512 only. What's the difference between the two?
Okay, so in the 327, big blue stem has a different seeds per pound listed than what you guys have on 512. And
all right, I see.
Until the standard changes and we get them the same, we had to build in an option for the 512 because the seeding rates are going to be different.
Okay,
and so
that's
again,
all right. I understand now.
That's one of the things we wanted to get the calculator out and not wait for a bunch of revising standards and things of that sort. But when we do get that all hashed out, that'll go away and they'll just have the one option.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions so far? And I could just show you too, Roger. If I click the forage and biomass planting option, you notice that only the 512 only species pop up. And I can clear that filter. And now I'm back to the longer list that includes species that are not in 512. And again, we were talking in the future too, 512, significantly expanding that list is something that we wanted to do in the future. But again, we wanted to get the calculator out right away. So if I scroll down, you have the ability to generate a mix of at least 30 graminoid species. And so down here at the bottom, for the graminoids, it's telling you the total number of species in the mix. We've got 2. The total pounds per acre, the seeds per square foot, the average coefficient of conservatism. I'm not going to get into that right now. That's a whole nother topic, but it's there. But like I said, for now, we're not going to focus on that. And then the estimated cost of the graminoids per acre. So right now we're sitting at $16 an acre. What you'll also notice when I hovered, if you see these red triangles in the upper right corner, that means there's a comment box that gives you additional information on that box. And so it just means that here species richness is simply the total number of the species represented in the mix. And then a little bit why it was important about, here's, like I said, we're not going to get into in depth, but here, if you want to know what coefficient of conservatism is, go over here. There's a comment box that explains all of that to you. Over here, we put it in bold. Seed cost can be highly variable. We just kind of got those red flags out there to make sure people are aware of that. We will zip down. And so the next section, we are dealing with the forbs and legumes. So you have the option of putting up to 40 species in a mix using the calculator. And sometimes you'll pull it up and it looks blank. I've got to fix this. If you drag the bar up, there are species there that you can pick from. So we're just going to pick alum root. Again, everything populates off to the right. And for the forbs and legumes, this is where here we've got to input a bloom period. So for this particular species, your options are early or mid. And you got to say, I want this species to count as an early species. And so for the pollinator mixes, it's real important if you want the check sheets to take this into account. And so what's the criteria if you want to have a species count for a pollinator in a bloom period? Do you guys know? Right off the cuff? 0.3. All right? And so we're going to hit enter. And again, across the board, just like in the grasses, it goes across, it lets you know what it is. It's a perennial forb. There is an extra column here that will let folks know if it's a Monarch preferred forb or not. I'm going to go ahead. We're going to go in. Let's pick a mid. And we're going to pick a late blooming species. So pretty simple. Once they get going, you can see that you can whip in here and do this fairly quickly. So here it's telling us we've got 3 species, 0.49 pounds per acre at this point. That's 0.9 seeds per square foot. The estimated cost of the forbs right now is $151 per acre. And then down here in the subshrub section, they can do the exact same thing. They can pick lead plant. We'll pick New Jersey tea. Pick a bloom period. Again, we'll just do 0.3 and 0.3. And again, all the totals, same as the grass section and the forb section. It's going to give you the total for this subset of the mix. And then at the very bottom, it then says overall, the grand total, we've got 4.22 pounds per acre, 11.5 seeds per square foot, 7 species, and we're looking at an estimated total cost of $282 an acre. And if this is too high, you're like, ooh, I can't do that. That's way too much. That's when you can kind of come up here and say, look at this estimated cost per acre for the species. You can see here, New Jersey tea is really throwing this mix out of whack. So you say, I'm going to have to drop that back. So they're able to kind of evaluate the mix here and figure out what's costing them so much money and then making whatever changes they want to kind of try to hit a target cost. So now we're down to 180. So before I go on over to the seeding plan, do we have any questions?
Hey, Jennifer, this is Justin. And I know this is what we're trying I know this is what we're trying to get away from, but we're going to have a lot of folks asking if there's any canned mixes that they can just click on and it pre-populates some of this stuff. You know, if they basically have
I am working on that.
Okay. We're going to get that question. I know we're trying to get away from that, but we're going to get that question. So
I know. Well, what I've got is I already have mixes. They're going to probably be more suited to maybe the northern 2/3 of the state, and I'm going to have to work on the southern 2/3 of the state. But they're kind of community-based mixes where, again, they're going to be, and they can take those as examples or templates. They don't have to use them exactly as they are.
Right.
But it's already in there. It's already built in for them. They can change the seeds per square foot. They can swap out species as long as it's appropriate to do so. I just got an email from a staff member out in the field saying, hey, you know, I've got this species I can't find. Is it okay to use this other species? You know, they're asking those types of questions. But they're able to go in and edit it however they see fit, or as they're working with a seed vendor that the customers decided they want to go with, and so I am working on that.
And that's great because, you know, if we've got a seed mixture that's this kind of can, it's got 15 in it, on a given year, 3 or 4 of them may be really high or not available, and it's nice for them to just be going and replace those and not have to completely redo everything.
Yes.
So that works out great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said, I wanted to make it helpful, and in these kind of tools, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you have to be rigid with something. So we really put a lot of effort into this to make it functional and flexible. Any other questions or anything before I move on to the seeding plan, which is basically the job sheet?
This is Sharon. Staff have the option to use the filters. What's the expectation? Can they just ignore the filters, use a statewide mix, move on down the road? Or what is the level of filtering and site-specific that we really are expecting them to use in the planning process? I think that's going to be an important issue to determine.
Yeah, let me say a word about that. I mean, this is just a tool for a conservation planner to use, right? So we're expecting them to do good planning. So I would think, you know, one thing that they're going to have to make sure they're doing is matching the species to the site in terms of both geography as well as you know, the moisture regime is critically important. So while we got a lot of species that are statewide species, great, but most of them, a lot of species may cover 1 or 2 moisture regimes, but you know, not all 3. So, you know, this doesn't, whether they use a filter or not, they still are going to have to know their soil up to the site and the ecotype that should be there and plan accordingly. So it's just a tool, what we got here.
Yeah, and we had an example, I think Sharon and I, we were talking, is you look at that moisture regime, like Jean said, that's critically important. I'd say bare minimum, they have got to pick the xeric, mesic, or wet. And I had mentioned that if they think it's dry mesic, you know, xeric mesic, you know, that they can toggle between these 2 buttons to see the different lists, right? So they can click mesic, pick species, and then click xeric, and then pick species. What they should not be doing is creating a mix where they've got xeric here, and they're going all the way down to hydric here. That's not good planning. You've got a mix now that you've got species in this mix that aren't site-suited. If they have to do that sort of thing to seed the site, then they should probably be developing 2 different mixes and putting them. Now, again, that's within reason. You know, you're not going to run around and do that for a tenth of an acre or something like that. But if they are starting to have to really jump from one extreme to another, they really need to be asking themselves whether or not this is a mix that's going to be successful. And again, for the customer, you know, we've got customers, it's their responsibility to maintain these. We want them to have a good experience. We want to have good habitat out there. And so again, that just comes down to the planning.
I just like to point out that if they did select statewide, they're really limiting their species.
They are, because you're really whittling down to just the species, you know, in the entire state. And the state, there's so many differences. Like you can see here, just with selecting prairie and hydric, you know, it really shortened the pick list here.
So statewide does not mean all species.
Yeah, statewide does not mean that every species in the calculator is going to be available. It's just the species that have a statewide distribution. There's a blank here that they can pick if they don't want to pick any ecoregion. And then, you know, the pick list didn't filter anything based on ecoregion. But again, if you're in far northern Illinois and you're picking a species that only really occurs in far southern Illinois, you know, it's probably not a good deal. It's probably not going to work very well. So those filters help guide them. They don't have to be experts in the plant. They can just indicate what are the, you know, what's the criteria, what am I looking for, and then it'll go in and filter out those pick lists for them, trying to make things easier. Zipping over here to the job sheet, this is where I was saying the information of the site, the date automatically populates. You can put in here, you know, who prepared the mix, or sorry, the name of the customer. Can't spell my name right. You can put in the track number, the field number. If there's a contract number you want to link to it, it's fine. If there's a particular program that this is associated, we can say it's CRP. We can say it's 10 acres. And what you see is when we hit the 10 acres, the cost change. I see I have an issue here I got to check out. And then here, the type of seeding. We'll just say it's a 327 pollinator planting. You also have a box here that people can check whether or not source identified ecotype seed is required or preferred for this particular planting. Typically, when we send out this plan, we don't want people to see the estimated costs. So you can hide the cost column before you print it. Here we go, you know, you can unhide it. The other part of the job sheet here is you can see we've got all these blank rows because we didn't pick the maximum number of species possible. So we can also hide the extra rows. So then it condenses it to just the rows for the species that we did populate. So again, you get information about the species, the estimated cost, and then you're going to get these subtotals for the grasses, for the forbs, and for the subshrubs. And then down here at the bottom, you're going to get the total for the mix overall. Also here at the bottom, if there's a requirement for soil amendments, they're able to note that information here. We've got, again, this caveat that typically the soil amendments are not necessary for a native planting, and they really should be using some sort of soil test or something that indicates that a soil amendment is needed. They also, you have the option here picking the seeding dates, whether you want spring or dormant in the zone. So maybe dormant zone 1 is the preferred, but if you want to give them the option, you can give them the spring. You know, however you guys want to do that. Whether or not there's a companion or nurse crop, you know, they can do that. They can put a bushel per acre of oats. And then for 512, again, 512 only, there were specific companion crops, 512, so those are available here. Any additional seeding criteria, they can type that up here in this box here. And then down below is the box for the certification, practice certification can be documented. So any questions about the job sheet?
I would just like to mention, if you don't have any acres in your acres field there, if it's blank, you won't get any seeding rates.
Yeah, see it all zeroed out. So you have got to put in the acres. Yeah. And then they'll calculate.
I panicked one day until I figured that out.
Don't panic. Don't panic.
Yeah, right.
So like I said, as people start using it, they'll be whipping through here pretty fast.
And
all right, so
got a question on the source identified ecotype, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
None of our practice standards say that it's required, isn't that correct? So really,
the new 643 says that they should be. It's a consideration, but it highly encourages people to use it.
So does that qualify as required?
I don't think it's required because it's not a criteria. Okay. But if you're doing that, you can say preferred, and then that lets the vendor know that if they've got seed, if they've got accessions that are within 3 miles of that planting area to use those accessions versus some other accession they have that may be pulled from further away. Right. But one thing that is helpful if people start doing this, one of the problems we have with the Palmer amaranth is we have so few species that we could use in some of these pollinator mixes. They started running out of them, and they started pulling seed from further and further away and ended up pulling seed and contaminating the Palmer. Is probably what was going on. So if we can kind of try to get people to request seed that's more local, and we're giving them greater species options where if one species, they run out of seed or it's running low, because of this calculator, they have the ability to go in and pick a substitute or a different species that is available and from a more locally sourced seed source. If we can do that, that's great. But I understand right now Illinois does not have an ecotype program or certification or anything like that. So this is a little, it's not as tight as a state, like some of the other states actually have requirements for ecotype seed. So in the future this may change, but right now it's just there, it's helpful, and that's where just, you can say prefer. That means it's not required, but it lets that vendor know that, hey, if you've got it available, please use those exceptions. All right, moving on to the check sheets. This is the Monarch and Pollinator check sheet. So you come over, and this is where you can look and see whether or not you're meeting the criteria. And I know I've got this issue here that I need to fix, but you come over and it's telling you whether your spring blooming forbs and shrubs, the minimum required is 3 in the standard. And then in this next cell over tells you how many do you have in your mix. And then the next column over tells you whether or not you're meeting the criteria for the standard. Again, we've got the pop-up comments here. Here it states, that for a species to count for a bloom period, it must be greater than or equal to 0.3 seeds per square foot to count. And so a lot of times we'll get people say, well, I've got all these spring blooming forbs in there, but I'm not meeting the criteria. And when we go back in and look, and it's because maybe they have 0.1 seeds per square foot. And so these little pop-up boxes help remind them what it takes to count in each of these fields. Again, it goes through what are the requirements in sites with less than 5% slope versus what are the requirements if it's greater than or equal to 5% slope. And if it's a Monarch mix, then whether or not they're meeting the criteria for Monarch mixes. And as I mentioned, this is for the full seeding rate, this is for the half seeding rate. Same deal here for 327. Same thing here for 643. Now this does get a little more in depth. At the top here, there's the information about the number of forbs and shrubs, graminoids, legumes, and then the total species. Right here, the minimums for 643. And then here, this is the seeds per square foot information. And then down below here, if you're doing forb only full interseedings, requirements there and whether or not you meet. Here, there's additional criteria for pollinator and monarch purposes or plantings. The additional requirements if it's a monarch planting. To the right is the same, but for half rate interseeding. And down below are just recommendations. And again, this is really popping the hood, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But this is information about developing mixes that are very well balanced. Making sure you got early, mid, late successional species, that you got a mix that's kind of, that all the species in there are evenly distributed. Again, that helps in establishment, et cetera. I'm not going to get into development of this type, popping the hood on mixes in this training. But this information is there. And then we've got same thing, the 512 forage and biomass, the check sheet there. What's the criteria? And then the mix they're developing, what do they have, and then it'll let them know whether or not it's meeting criteria or not. I showed you the forb and legume table, the grass table, the woody species table, the name lookup, plant synonyms, and the revision tabs. So, questions, comments, recommendations?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I don't think we're able to put in this calculator anywhere that mentions no tall grasses for the pollinator and monarch mixes. So the planner's just going to have to remember that from the 327 practice standard.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something for us to remember when we're helping the field with mixes, to remind them. And also the for the large seeded species like legumes. And I don't remember if some of the silphiums fell into that. 4 ounces per acre was acceptable in lieu of the 0.3 seeds per square foot for the larger seeded species.
We're going to do that real quick.
Okay.
So I just had a seed dealer get a hold of me. What I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to go up, clear the criteria, sit back down here. He's dealing with wild lupin. Okay, so I mentioned earlier 0.3 seeds per square foot is required for a species to count towards a pollinator bloom period. Well, in the standard we had, if it's a species that's got very large seed and very few seeds per pound, then as long as they have 4 ounces per acre, it can be counted as a pollinator species. And so in this case, they're less than 0.2 seeds per square foot, but you can see over here, they have over 0.25 pounds per acre. That means, if you break it down to ounces, that's 4 ounces. 0.25 is 4 ounces. And so they're above that, so this species is going to count towards the early bloom period. So that's all factored in to the checklist. It'll pop up over here. I got to fix this deal here, but that's taken care of for them.
You may want to leave a comment for that species. Comment box. Explain. Those large seeded species.
I'll add it. What I can do, I'll add it to this comment box. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
Do you think you could add a comment similar to that to the grasses for the pollinator monarch check sheet to remind them
Possibly.
that
Possibly.
short ones only? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, and this project has been a lot of work, and I know Jennifer's put in a ton of work, as well as Ellen. I know you've helped out a lot too, and Sam Chivas helped us as well, and so really appreciate that. I think it's going to be and is a tool that field officers are going to be able to, our planners in the field, use a lot, and will help them do this job, as well as help others, as well as ourselves, qualify and mix as meeting our standard through this tool as well. So hopefully it's going to save us some time in doing the planning, and best of all, get good plantings, good seedings with the right species out there on the sites that we're trying to plan.
And like Gene said, the purpose of putting this out is twofold. One is for our staff to develop mixes, but the other one is for, I guess it's 3, because then staff are also certifying mixes. But then the other one is, we were getting a lot of requests from the vendors. Hey, does this mix meet your standard? Can you run, can you let us know, or can you give us approval? From this point forward, we're telling them you need to go to the calculator, you can put your mix in, and then they can just determine whether or not their mix meets the standard. Because a lot of times they were sending things in, but as Justin mentioned earlier, they run out of species, and then they'd get a hold of you and say, hey, I had to change this. Now, does it still meet? And this is a way where they can quickly go in on the fly and check their mixes as well without having to contact us.